For half a century, Charles Schulz drew peanuts every day without fail. He became the world's most well-known cartoonist and earned millions of dollars. But one phone call in December 1999 altered everything. "It's over," Schulz sobbed as he told his family at his workshop. For months, the creator of Charlie Brown had concealed a terrible secret. He had received bad news from doctors, his hands were shaking, and his vision was deteriorating. Peanuts would be eternally changed by what transpired in that room, shocking millions of fans who were unaware of what was about to happen. On November 26, 1922, Charles Monroe Schulz was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Carl, his German-born father, was a barber. Prior to being a stay-at-home mom, his mother, Dina, worked as a waitress. Her ancestry was Norwegian. They had little money and lived in a little house. Dina's workplace was next to Carl's little barbershop. Their only child was named Charles. He spent much of his childhood in St. Paul. However, they were forced to relocate to Needles, California, for 2 difficult years during the Great Depression. Charles's perspective on the world was greatly influenced by his battle to make ends meet. He was always affected by seeing his parents struggle to make ends meet. Those similar emotions appeared in the Peanuts character's minor concerns and melancholy years later. Charles was given the nickname Sparky by his uncle just 2 days after his birth. It was inspired by Spark Plug, a well-known cartoon horse from the Barney Google comic strip. In 1922, that horse gained popularity, and many children were given the moniker Sparky at that time, but none rose to fame more than Charles Schulz. Cartoons seemed to be a part of his life from the beginning. Even during his career, he was referred to as Sparky rather than Charles. Charles was just 7 years old when the Great Depression struck in late 1929. The barbershop owned by his father lost business. They had to relocate multiple times. He was uncertain of everything. He later described their time in Needles, California, as unusual and unpleasant since it was so isolated and strange. He was always afraid of losing everything. He recalled periods when they were without food. When Charlie Brown was concerned that they might go hungry if his father lost his job, he even put that in peanuts. Charles was familiar with that sensation. He had experienced it. Spike was the name of his dog as well. A black and white hunting dog, Spike performed things that other dogs wouldn't. He consumed razor blades, rubber, tacks, and nails. And he was alright somehow. When Charles was 14 years old in 1937, he sent a drawing of Spike to Ripley's Believe It or Not. It was released on February 22, 1937. His drawing was reproduced for the first time at that location. For him, it was everything. He felt a great sense of pride. Spike comprehended almost 50 words and was able to ring doorbells. He wasn't just a pet, however. Spike died after being struck by a car when Charles was around 10 years old. He was severely affected by the loss and it lingered in his heart. That memory later gave rise to Snoopy. His mother encouraged his creativity despite their lack of wealth. Even though they hardly had enough money for meals, she nevertheless purchased him supplies. His dad didn't think drawing could be a legitimate career. It seemed absurd to him. The house became tense as a result. Carl urged Charles to cut his hair or do something useful. Dina wished for him to pursue his aspirations. For him, his mother's support was crucial. Unfortunately, she fell ill when he was still a child. She passed away at the age of 48 from cervical cancer in 1943. He was broken by it. That following week, he was being drafted into the army. She was never able to witness his success. Every drawing he drew after that seemed to contain a fragment of her. Charles began attending Richards Gordon Elementary School in St. Paul when he was 6 years old. They advanced him by 2 grades since he was so intelligent. However, that simply made life more difficult. He was smaller and younger than the others. He was continuously harassed by the other children. He was quiet and bashful. He was out of place. Forever after, he felt the agonizing sensation of being excluded. It became Charlie Brown, the youngster who, despite his best efforts, never quite fits in. Charles ought to have been pleased when Ripley's published his Spike sketch in 1937. Instead, he was made fun of by his classmates. The drawing was deemed stupid. Not even his teachers were concerned. Early on, he understood that being successful did not guarantee that others would like him. At times, it exacerbated the situation. His comics repeatedly reenacted the lesson. Things didn't get much better in high school. He received a 0 in physics and failed Latin, English, and algebra. Each and every drawing he attempted to submit to the school yearbook was turned down. He was devastated. They didn't even explain why he had put in so much effort. He was plagued by that rejection for the remainder of his life. He even made his previous report card public at the age of 53 to demonstrate that he wasn't as stupid as people thought. His mother was diagnosed with cervical cancer in 1938, when he was only a youngster. Over the following 5 years, she gradually deteriorated. Charles witnessed her suffering every day, but first no one informed him of how terrible it was. She wept a lot. Medication hardly made a difference. To lift her spirits, he started creating comics. There was nothing else he could do. To allow his dad to readily check on her, they moved into an apartment above the barbershop. Charles watched her gradually disappear. At night, he would be awakened by her cries. 3 days prior to his deployment to the war, on February 28, 1943, she passed away. The expression in her eyes that day stayed with him forever. Charles signed up for a mail-order art course from the art instruction schools in 1940 at the age of 17. At the time, it cost $170, which was a significant amount, many months' worth of his father's earnings. Despite Dina's mounting medical expenditures, Carl continued to pay it. Charles studied everything, including calligraphy and figure drawing. He operated by candlelight since they occasionally lacked the funds for electricity. He kept using the same materials till they broke. He even acquired a job grading art for the same school later on to help pay for extra lessons. He was learning that pursuing your dreams required sacrifice, and he carried that lesson with him forever. Charles was recruited into the Army in February 1943. He joined the 20th Armored Division and rose to the rank of Staff Sergeant. He commanded a squad of 50 caliber machine guns in Europe. He landed his battalion in France on February 19, 1945. They marched through combat zones for more than 1,400 meters. They reached Dao only a day after the camp was freed on April 30, 1945. Survivors were strolling close to their vehicles. Charles was always reminded of their appearance. He was forever haunted by that tragedy. Despite being in charge of a gun squad, he only fired once and neglected to load the weapon. Nevertheless, the German soldier gave up. One of Charles's proudest honors for his service was the combat infantryman insignia. He had a final opportunity to see his mother before shipping away. He took a quick detour from Fort Snelling to pay her a visit. She was dying out. He kept his word to her during their last conversation. "We'll probably get a dog when I come back." Later, Snoopy turned into that dog. He was never able to tell her about it. Charles had changed by the time the war ended and he returned in late 1945. He was traumatized and grieving. The little apartment above the barbershop was his new home. Despite his thoughts of suicide, he continued to draw. In July 1946, he accepted a position judging drawings for meager pay at art instruction institutes. That office carried seeds for his future, even if it seemed like he was going nowhere. Characters from Peanuts were inspired by some of their co-workers. Among them was Donna Mae Johnson, a woman with red hair. He had been in love with the red-haired accountant, Donna Mae Johnson, back in 1947, before he had his big break. They dreamed and ate lunch together. She seemed like the one to him. He asked Donna to marry him in 1950, right before Peanuts was released, but she declined. The man she had known for years, L. Wald, was already her fiancé. Charles was broken. He referred to it as the most agonizing loss of his life. It was heartbreaking to watch someone you love leave and get married to someone else. That heartache remained. It was immortalized in the tale of the little girl with the red hair who never returns. Charlie Brown's Love. Le Folks was Charles Schulz's debut comic strip. It began in the Minneapolis Tribune on June 8, 1947. It later relocated to the Pioneer Press in St. Paul. Every time it was published, he only received $10. He continued to run the strip until January 22, 1950, when the editor put an end to it. Schulz requested that his comic be moved from the women's section to the page dedicated to actual comics. He requested additional funds as well. The editor declined. After trying for over 3 years, Schulz was compelled to give up. He was only 24 years old at the time, living above his father's barbershop and struggling to make ends meet as a cartoonist. It was a devastating loss. His first real break had come from Lil Folks. He persisted. In 1950, he repeated the concept to the United Feature Syndicate, but they informed him that the name Lil Folks was too similar to existing comic strips. The syndicate disregarded Schulz's suggestion to use Charlie Brown, or just plain Charlie Brown. The name Peanuts was chosen from a list by a production manager. Before selecting it, he didn't even read the strip. Schulz felt ashamed. He felt it lacked dignity and was the worst name ever. For the remainder of his life, until his death in 2000, he detested the name. They never changed it, despite his repeated pleas. October 2, 1950, saw the release of the first Peanut strip. There were only 7 newspapers that carried it. Over the course of the first month, Schulz earned just $90. He continued to take on side jobs because that was insufficient to support him. Gravestone lettering was one of them. Charlie Brown was seen strolling past Sure and Patty in the first comic strip. Sure grinned and remarked, "Good old Charlie Brown." However, in the final panel, he turned and declared, "I hate him." That sinister turn of events perfectly captured Schulz's innermost feelings. 2 days later, on October 4, Snoopy joined the strip. However, the initial reaction was severe and sluggish, even with him. By 1952, things had started to alter. Peanuts expanded from 7 to 40 newspapers. The jump was more than 500%, Schulz persisted. In September 1952, he presented Leonis Van Pelt as a baby. Later on, Leonis emerged as the strip's sane voice. However, editors strongly objected when Schulz allowed Leonis to quote passages from the Bible in the late 1950s. In 1961, Leonis recited a distressing chapter from the book of Jeremiah in a Christmas comic. There were papers that wanted to completely cancel Peanuts. It was necessary for Schulz to compromise. Though he never made religion the main focus of the strip, he used Leonis to discuss faith. The only way to save everything was to do that. Schulz married in the midst of all of this. His marriage to Joyce Halverson took place on April 18, 1951. She had a little daughter named Meredith and was 22 years old. She was adopted by Schulz, who insisted that she was his biological daughter. However, things were still difficult. Schulz once had to pawn his art supplies in order to pay his bills because he was so impoverished. The only things keeping him alive were those tools. Even so, Schulz vowed that he would never compromise his artistic vision, regardless of what the syndicate desired. In the end, they had 4 more kids, but Schulz remained primarily concerned with his job. Some claim that as a father and husband, he was hardly there. Everything was altered by Snoopy. He was just a typical dog when he made his debut in 1950. He remained silent while walking on all 4s. On January 9, 1956, however, an unexpected event occurred. He was able to stand. It was never Schulz's intention. "Snoopy just did it," he remarked. The strip was forever altered by that moment. By 1957, Snoopy was always walking straight. He became Joe Cool, the cool dog, the struggling writer, and the flying ace of World War I. Snoopy was no longer merely a pet. He was a worldwide celebrity. People began to recognize him as Mickey Mouse or Coca-Cola. In 1952, Leonis's security blanket made its debut. It became into one of the most contentious concepts in the strip. Though he never referred to it as a security blanket, Schulz was influenced by his daughter Amy's favorite toy. The readers did. A psychologist came up with the phrase transitional object around the same period in 1953. Arguments broke out. The blanket was deemed unhealthy by several specialists. Letters of rage were sent by parents. However, studies revealed that around 70% of children had an emotional bond with toys or blankets. The argument became much more heated as a result. The most emotionally invested character in the strip was Linus, who was also the wisest. People were astonished by that paradox. Peanuts was featured in almost 100 publications by 1955. At that point, Lucy's well-known mental health booth appeared. Though it offered therapy for 5 cents, it appeared to be a lemonade stand. Lucy would offer smart counsel on weighty subjects. After World War II, when parents were perplexed, Schulz came up with the idea during his own therapy sessions. Deeply held fears like worry and responsibility were discussed in a children's comic strip. However, children adored it. By 1958, Peanuts appeared in 40 foreign and 355 U.S. newspapers. Lucy's booth was also used as a teaching tool by some actual therapists. Her counsel was very remarkable. Schulz responded quickly to the Soviet Union's October 4, 1957, Sputnik satellite launch. Characters from Peanuts kept an eye on the skies for the satellite. Schulz made light of the actual launch of the dog law by having Snoopy send Leonis into space in 1958. In the end, Snoopy became the safety mascot for NASA. Then a significant event occurred. Franklin Armstrong, the first black character in Peanuts, was added by Schulz on July 31, 1968. 11 days had passed since the murder of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Schulz had received a letter from a teacher named Harriet Glickman requesting reform. He listened despite his fear of making a mistake. Editors in the South grumbled. Schulz was also advised not to depict Franklin sitting in a classroom full of white children. No, Schulz responded. I would rather quit than erase Franklin, he stated. In the 1950s, the Peanuts merchandise empire took off. In 1952, Schulz earned $30,000 cartooning, which he used to purchase a $35,000 house. A tiny Snoopy doll was on the market by 1958. The book Happiness is a Warm Puppy spent 45 weeks on the bestseller list in 1962. Everything altered as a result. Large corporations began to contact In 1959, Ford agreed to a 7-year contract. In 1960, Hallmark's Peanuts greeting cards were a huge success. Approximately 20,000 new Peanuts products were released annually by the 1990s. The company was making more than $1 billion a year. Schulz was earning between $30 and $40 million annually. His estate is still making millions of dollars even after his passing. He rose to become one of the world's wealthiest and most prosperous cartoonists. Something amazing occurred in 1965. On December 9, CBS broadcast A Charlie Brown Christmas. At first, the network detested it. They objected to the religious message, the jazz music, and the fact that the characters were voiced by children. They believed it would not work. However, half of all TV-owning homes in America tuned in when it aired. It was a huge success. It received both a Peabody and an Emmy. It first brought in approximately $50,000 for Schulz, but eventually it brought in over $50 million. A whole series of Peanuts holiday broadcasts began with that one special. Peanuts appeared in more than 1,000 publications by 1970. The strip alone was bringing approximately $1 million for Schulz annually. Then the reaction started. He was accused of stealing concepts from Dennis the Menace and other comics. He was even accused of stealing characters by some. In order to defend his work, Schulz had to go in court. He was terribly saddened by that. Despite his victory, the charges remained with him and fueled his fear for the rest of his life. Schulz received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 1975. But he was collapsing behind the scenes. Over 50 years, he has drawn 17,897 strips by himself. He was broken by the pressure. Due to tiredness, he was admitted to the hospital in the middle of the 1970s. Sometimes he had to hold his wrist to continue drawing because his hands shook so much. Physicians referred to it as an essential tremor. In 50 years, he only took one 5-week holiday. His health was almost destroyed by his perfectionism. Schulz had bids from all around the world in the 1980s, but he insisted on keeping the Peanuts characters the same. The goal of Japanese studios was to give Snoopy a more human appearance. No, Schulz responded. Charlie Brown was supposed to behave differently, according to French and Italian producers. Schulz declined again. A few transactions fell through. Millions were lost by him. He didn't care, though, but he treated his characters as if they were members of his family. Peanuts turned 40 in 1990. But rather than rejoicing, Schulz spoke candidly. He admitted to interviewers that he had battled depression all of his life. He said that he was the inspiration for Charlie Brown. The final loser is Charlie Brown that, he claimed, is both his destiny and his magic. Despite his achievements, Schulz felt alone. He claimed that everything he understood about loneliness came from his time in the army. And he never received love in return from the real-life red-haired girl he had adored. The ache persisted. In September 1973, Schulz wed Jean Clyde following his divorce from Joyce. She has 2 children and was 17 years younger. They remained together until 2000, when he passed away. But he always prioritized his work. Even during holidays and vacations, he meticulously sketched each cartoon by hand. Despite the tranquility of his second marriage, the specter of his work-related alcoholism persisted. Charles Schulz got into a heated argument with the man who animated his drawings in 1966. Following the tremendous success of A Charlie Brown Christmas, which attracted an incredible 46.6% of all TV viewers, CBS wanted to produce another holiday special. However, Schulz became irate when it came time to create Charlie Brown, It's the Great Pumpkin. He felt Snoopy was being overly adorable by animator Bill Melendez. The dispute became so heated that Schulz nearly put the project on hold. CBS lost thousands of dollars, production was delayed, and advertising had to be rescheduled. Much later than anticipated, on October 27, the special ultimately broadcast. Only $76,000 was allocated, which is hardly more than one Flintstones episode. The situation was further complicated by Schulz's perfectionism. They experienced that stress for years. By the middle of the 1970s, Schulz was earning between $30 and $40 million annually. He didn't feel safe, though, despite all that accomplishment. He engaged in a heated conflict with United Features Syndicate from 1974 to 1977. They wanted him to add more edginess and modernity to the Peanuts strip. Schulz declined. Everyone was astonished when he said, "Either you print it the way I draw it or I quit." They hired Superman artist Al Plastino behind his back to covertly create backup Peanuts comics in case Schulz left. They earned enough money for 18 months. Schulz was incensed when he learned about it in 1977. However, he used that betrayal to obtain a significant contract rather than leaving. What happened to the strip was up to him from that point on. The confidential sketches were destroyed. Things took a further turn for the worse in the 1980s. A number of cartoonists claimed that Schulz had stolen their concepts for Snoopy's small bird companion, Woodstock. Originally held on April 4, 1967, Woodstock was formally renamed after the music festival in 1970. Lawsuits were made by certain artists who said Schulz had stolen their designs. There was no calm settling for Schulz. He retaliated by employing renowned copyright attorneys. The court determined that Woodstock was unique, drawing inspiration from a childhood pal and an odd Popeye cartoon figure known as Alice the Goon. Although Schulz prevailed in each case, the conflicts exposed the extent of the jealousy that went on behind the scenes. He demonstrated that he would not allow anyone to claim credit for his work, even though the litigation cost him hundreds of thousands of dollars. At the age of 59, Schulz required quadruple bypass surgery in September 1981. He had to give up drawing for the first time in 31 years. Fake Peanuts comics began appearing in more than 200 newspapers while he was recovering. There were many obscene and mature jokes in these bootleg strips. The FBI was approached by the syndicate. It was known as Operation Snoopy by the agents. They detained 12 persons after conducting raids in 6 separate states. The fakes were more than a joke. They belonged to a major counterfeiting organization. The FBI discovered counterfeit comics, printing machines, and international expansion plans. Schulz's hand tremor worsened over this period. His drawings began to have shakier lines. Readers were able to observe the difference by 1982. Newspaper comic sections were fading by 1995. The number of Peanut sheets had decreased from 2,600 to roughly 2,000. At 75, Schulz was worn out. He hinted to an early retirement in 1997. He was angry that the syndicate wanted to reduce the size of the comic or pay ghost artists to assist, and he was sick of deadlines. For 47 years, he had been drawing it by himself. There were rumors that he was being replaced by other cartoonists who were being discreetly contacted. Schulz took his first 5-week vacation that same year. Old strips were republished while he slept. He used it to demonstrate that he was still needed by the world. The communication was successful. He signed a new contract in 1998. Peanuts would never be drawn by anyone else. He maintained complete control. However, 1999 arrived. Due to a clogged artery in his stomach, Schulz had emergency surgery on November 16. Doctors discovered stage 3 colon cancer during the procedure. Already, the cancer had spread. He then suffered many strokes as a result of blood clots. He had only 6 to 7 months to live, according to his physicians. Even though his health had been deteriorating all summer, nobody realized how bad it was until that day. He was 76. His vision was harmed by the strokes. He lost the ability to sketch after becoming blind in one eye. He was constantly ill from chemotherapy. Schulz was forced to retire by December. According to his son Monty, he appeared worn out and dejected. Even though his hand had been trembling for years, it was now out of control. For Monty, losing the ability to sketch was a blow to his soul. He gave up fighting. Charles Schulz announced his retirement on December 14, 1999. He sobbed while speaking with Al Roker on The Today Show. He had a breakdown while signing his final strip, saying, "I never dreamed that this was what would happen to me. But all of a sudden, it's gone. It's been taken away from me. I did not take this away from me. That poor kid, he never even got to kick the football," he said in a whisper. He felt as though life had ultimately deceived him, just like Charlie Brown. Schulz had one final request before he retired. He amended his contract to include a clause. After him, no one could carry on Peanuts. The syndicate was taken aback. The majority of comic strips kept adding new artists, but Schulz refused. His entire family was behind him. Approximately 95% of newspapers decided to run reruns instead of allowing anyone else to touch it once he retired. Only as he depicted it, Peanuts would survive. Schulz continued to move despite his cancer. He and his daughter went ice skating on February 11, 2000. He was only a day away from passing away. At 9:45 p.m., he died quietly while sleeping. February 12. His last Sunday cartoon appeared in newspapers the next morning, February 13. It had previously been planned, and now it was a farewell letter. Snoopy is shown in the comic strip sitting at his typewriter and writing, "Dear friends," while expressing gratitude to everyone. After 50 years, Schulz has produced 197 strips, including 17. His death and final strip came at a nearly miraculous time, almost like anything from a work of fiction. At the time of his death, Peanuts was published in 21 languages and 2,600 newspapers in 75 countries. His work was read by 355 million people per day. Since he routinely drew weeks ahead of time, Schulz had previously warned that the strip would survive him. That was realized. Approximately 500 people attended his funeral after he passed away. However, when a fresh biography was published in 2007, things became tangled. Serious allegations regarding Schulz's personal life were raised in David Mix's book Schulz and Peanuts. According to the report, he was chilly, sad, and even had an affair with a woman who was 23 years younger. Monty, his son, was enraged. He referred to the book as being full of false statements and lies. According to the family, the book misrepresented Schulz's happiness and distorted the truth. Fans weren't supposed to believe this portrayal of their father. In Santa Rosa, the Charles Schulz Museum opened its doors in 2002. It contains about 7,000 of the original comics. It was intended to honor his life's labor. Fans, however, started to speculate about the guy behind the drawings when the biography was published. That argument centered on the museum. Should we just respect the artwork, or should we also inquire about the artist's personal life? Charles Schulz wasn't flawless in the end, but he produced something that made hundreds of millions of people happy and comfortable. For half a century, he worked nearly every day, gave voice to silent children like Charlie Brown, and demonstrated that even the most basic drawings could have profound meaning. It truly felt like the end of an era when he passed away. Serious allegations regarding Schulz's personal life were raised in David Mix's book Schulz and Peanuts. According to the report, he was chilly, sad, and even had an affair with a woman who was 23 years younger. Monty, his son, was enraged. He referred to the book as being full of false statements and lies. According to the family, the book misrepresented Schulz's happiness and distorted the truth. Fans weren't supposed to believe this portrayal of their father. In Santa Rosa, the Charles Schulz Museum opened its doors in 2002. It contains about 7,000 of the original comics. It was intended to honor his life's labor. Fans, however, started to speculate about the guy behind the drawings when the biography was published. That argument centered on the museum. Should we just respect the artwork, or should we also inquire about the artist's personal life? Charles Schulz wasn't flawless in the end, but he produced something that made hundreds of millions of people happy and comfortable. For half a century, he worked nearly every day, gave voice to silent children like Charlie Brown, and demonstrated that even the most basic drawings could have profound meaning.